and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group for the week or the day of March 16th, 2017. I want to welcome everybody to this week's call. We've got a really cool demo and some great stuff to cover around SharePoint Framework updates and a little bit on the client-side library as well. Yes, indeed, I'm on the West Coast. I'm coming to you live from Building 10, the temporary home of my team here in Microsoft. And I say temporary because we actually don't know where we're going to be next. We were going to move back to our original building, but now we're not. Anyway, enough on that. Let's talk about why we're here. We're here for the special interest group around client-side development and SharePoint Framework development. So those topics that inside the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, we might not get to put as much attention to them, for example, on the monthly call, which is tough to do any kind of specialized discussions because there's just so much to cover and the audience is so big. So we broke out these special interest groups. We were the first, and there's now a special interest group as well around the PowerShell development and the CSOM development. So you, of course, can attend one or all of the special interest groups, depending on what your interests are. And then what we'll be talking about here is updates and open discussion around the SharePoint framework and client-side development in general around SharePoint. So not entirely general, but around SharePoint. And then as well, we talk a little bit about the JavaScript core library that the P&P team has put together to try and help with your client-side development. And we actually will have an upcoming webcast Base and I are going to record next Monday, sort of describing a little bit of where we're at with the core library and how it fits into the bigger picture. So that'll be coming up. 2 links down there at the bottom, SPFx-community gets you to the Microsoft Tech community, which is a great place to start if you have questions. That's where you can find all our webcasts get posted, and you can ask questions on those webcasts or reach out to other folks in the community there. And then dev.office.com/SharePoint is your one-stop shop for all things SharePoint development. And so whether you are getting into the SharePoint framework for the first time or have questions around add-in development or even classic server-side SharePoint development, that is where you should head, and there'll be links and documentation and learnings on all those topics, and we're always working to improve those various things. Vesa just this week, after a year and a half of trying, got an article updated, so that was really a big step as we try and keep our documentation updated for all of you out there in the community.
Cost assessment.
And I'm afraid that's what, if you told him that Monday, Tuesday when we had him, that's where he started throwing the fit.
I hope that works out. So moving on, what are we going to be talking about today? Today's agenda, we're going to do a quick update on the JavaScript core component and how that's shaping up, and then we've got a bunch of updates from Vesa on the SharePoint framework. Got a really cool demo from Tomi. If you guys haven't seen this, it was posted in Gitter and as well on Twitter. So it's a Chrome extension that allows you to sort of do SharePoint queries and work with SharePoint right out of the browser. Really cool thing. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I play with it, and it's going to be really nice for doing quick updates and also testing out your SharePoint framework code as well as things related to the core library. But I'll let him demo that. I think it's really cool, and then we'll have plenty of time, of course, for the open discussion at the end. So quick update on the core component, where we're at with that. Thank you, as always, to everybody that's contributed. Appreciate that. It's very important to keep the community strong and as well get that great feedback from everybody on how we can grow and make things better. Just a few updates today. We did get 2.02 released last Friday, and that was largely bug fixes and stabilization. If you've read the blog post, the release blog post, talked about what we did, but that was all driven by great feedback, again, from the community, reporting issues, reporting ideas for enhancements, so really appreciate that. Keep that information coming. Did get an article out yesterday on extending the library with business objects, so sort of creating these custom objects that you can then bind to your various frameworks. And there's an example out there I did on Knockout, and you could do the same with React or Angular or name your framework of choice. So that's an article there, and hopefully that will help folks sort of extend the library. and bind it up with the things they're using. And then, like I said, we're going to record a webcast on Monday for what is SPFx. Thanks, Luis. Appreciate it. So that'll be a good webcast, I think. We get that question a lot. What is the library? Where does it fit within SharePoint Framework? Do I have to use it? Questions like that. So we'll seek to answer all that in that webcast, and we'll advertise that out once we get that recorded and published. So 2 links down there at the bottom. Again, the SharePoint P&P community, which I guess that's actually the older aka MS link, so we need to get that one updated. But it goes to the same place. So we just keep switching around our aka links. So the community, again, the Microsoft Tech community, and then Gitter is attached to our repo, so you can ask questions and try and get help specific to the core library on that Gitter channel, and we'll do our best to help you out there. But if you do find an issue or a problem, do report that to the issues list. That makes it a little bit easier to track. Gitter is just sort of an unthreaded stream. So if you do find an issue, please do report that in the issues list so we can make sure we track it. Again, opportunities to participate in this call or the JavaScript Special Interest Group or the core library. Welcome you to demo a SharePoint Framework web part. Any SharePoint Framework web part you might write, you think it's cool and you want to show it off to the community, it's a great opportunity for you to present and us in the community to learn from the work you've done. Demo something around the core library, always welcome as well. Contribute on GitHub, whether that's submitting issues or submitting pull requests for code updates. And then, of course, providing feedback. Like I said, for the last release, feedback really drove what was in that release. So it really helped us to make sure we were addressing issues people were seeing. A perfect example of that is rolling back the lib folder to ES5. That was 100% due to all the feedback we got that it was causing folks problems, and causing folks problems is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So it was an easy decision to make in the end to roll back, but again, we wouldn't have made it without that feedback. So keep that feedback coming, and we'll do our best to be responsive to it. And now I'll hand things over to Vesa to take us through an update with the SharePoint framework. Vesa, you ready to go?
Unmuting myself helps. We should have actually updated the slide. This section slide is completely not updated because it says developer preview release candidate, but luckily I did have a one additional slide here. So last time, 2 weeks ago, we actually just released SharePoint Framework to be generally available, and we started rolling that across the tenants. Right now, during this week, every single tenant in SharePoint Online should be already updated and using the GA version of the SharePoint framework. There's quite a few tenants out there which are hosted across multiple different SharePoint farms because they are ultimately farms on the background, so it took quite a long time to actually get everything updated, but we are in a good position right now. And that means that if you follow up on any of the tutorials or anything like that which is already updated to the GA, it should work properly based on within your tenant. Getting started, obviously, mentioned that URL quite a few times, devdevops.com/SharePoint. Like Patrick mentioned, this is our new landing page, and we want people to actually go there, and from there we're going to then link, for example, classic SharePoint development models as well. That's going to be actually changed at some point, so we're working on a small changes on the URLs, but that's coming up later in the queue. Now, on the devdevops.com SharePoint site, there's a few new articles which have come out for the past 2 weeks. So there's a one article related on how to use the feature framework for provisioning your assets to SharePoint Framework from SharePoint Framework solution. Did that make any sense? No, it didn't. How to use feature framework to provision SharePoint assets as part of your SharePoint Framework solution. So quite often it might be that your client-side web part has a dependency on a list which needs to be on a site. And that article and tutorial is actually showing how to make that happen. Some people might be like, hey, wait a minute, so we're still using feature framework? Well, the SharePoint Framework packaging engine and the process is taking advantage of the same process as with adding model. So using the feature framework from our perspective, from an engineering perspective, enabling that was a really simple thing. And so we wanted to keep that option available. There are multiple options on the SharePoint asset provisioning, and there's a nice webcast which we did together with Waldek on explaining the advantages and disadvantages of all of these options. Then there's a relatively new article related on JavaScript object model. So if you are using JavaScript object model, the SharePoint JavaScript object model, which we released back in, when was it, 2010 timeframe, and you want to use that together with SharePoint Framework, there's an article which is explaining how to make that happen. It's not definitely a recommended option. We would recommend people actually use REST APIs or PMP.js core library or well, the REST APIs directly. The JavaScript object model is there, it is supported, but we're not really investing on it at this point. And then there's a nice, relatively new article from Patrick related on how to use PMP.js core from a SharePoint Framework solution as well. So Patrick wrote that article where he's explaining how to use the PMP.js core library in a Knockout client-side web library. I have no idea, by the way, Patrick, why did you choose Knockout as your library, but why not? It's absolutely a valid option as well.
There were not a lot of examples with Knockout, and I thought...
No, fair point. Fair point.
I like Knockout.
Fair point. Okay, fair point. Cool. On the other side, I kind of mentioned some of this already, some of these videos already. So AKMS SPPNP videos is our PMP and SharePoint engineering video channel in the YouTube. So, and for the recent weeks, we have released kind of 3 different webcasts related on SharePoint Framework. So getting data from SharePoint in the SharePoint Framework solution, essentially showing options like what's the downside of using JavaScript object model versus REST versus the SharePoint Framework library or the SPPNP.js core library. Then there's a nice webcast related on provisioning SharePoint assets for your SharePoint Framework solution. Essentially, that falls back on the previous slide as well. So how do you use feature framework to provision assets as part of your SPFx solution? And then there's a quite nice webcast together with Waldek as well, related on SharePoint customizations when to use which model. Because with SharePoint, the SharePoint Framework is not replacing anything. You can still do addings, and we are investing on the addings in the future as well. We're looking into, for example, enabling SharePoint Framework development inside of an add-in. So if there's a requirement, for example, from a security perspective, that you need to isolate the customization, you can take that approach in the future. Good. What else? So getting started with SharePoint Framework training materials. We talked about this one quite a few times in the past, and this has been a relatively long-lasting project. Unfortunately, we did not release that before the release candidate. Oh, and I forgot to update the slide, so let me clarify that one. But it's now available, actually, AKMS SPFx training, and you will land on this right location in a GitHub. So this is underneath the Office Dev and Training Content repository, which is a massive repo and contains, for example, the team's development guidance and all of that, or training material. Within this, we have 8 modules, and from these 8 modules, 6 have been already updated to the GA level. So the rest, the 2, which are still pending, should be updated within a day or 2. And these contain essentially presentations, demo, labs. The recorded videos are actually coming slightly later. We're still working on a schedule on that one. But the whole point of this material is that if you are planning to, let's say, deliver any local trainings within your country or your region, you can use this material any way you want. There's ready-to-use labs and presentations, which you can choose which of the slides you actually want to use. So the whole point is that you don't actually have to start from scratch building your training material. There's a starting point for you, and you can choose which of those presentations you actually want to do. Good. Yeah, so that was the mistake on the slide. It is saying pending on GA update, currently in release candidate 0 level, but 6 of those 8 modules have been already updated. That actually happened today, 2 hours ago, so that's the reason why the slide is not yet up to date. Good. What are we working currently? So just quickly explaining from an engineering perspective and from a PMP perspective in the context of SharePoint Framework. So we're right now still working on getting all of our documentation to the GA level. There's quite a lot of documentation in the dev.office.com related on SharePoint Framework. So this has been slightly delayed based on our resourcing, but we're working on through those documents. Majority of the documents are already in GA level. But especially if you go to the articles underneath the guidance, there is always an indicator on the top of the article if it's not yet upgraded to the GA level. Then we're also working on updating all of our SharePoint Framework samples to the GA level in the GitHub. So in the GitHub, you can actually see from a README file of every single sample, is it already updated to the GA version, or is it using an older version? The reality is that if it's using an older version, it does not work with the GA. So anything which is not yet updated to GA would either require that you're modifying slightly the code, or it does not work within the SharePoint Online for the time being. Updating training materials to the GA level, like mentioned, 2 of those 8 modules are yet to be updated. That should happen today or tomorrow, based on the final testing and reviews on those materials. And then on the SharePoint framework in general, we have released our public roadmap or things what we're planning to do in the future, which is underneath the link which I pasted in the window. And these are essentially topics which we're looking into developing in the future related on SharePoint Framework. So SharePoint Framework is not just about client-side web parts, that's just a first start. We will have additional components and extensibility points as well. And right now we're working on the web part to web part connections. That's one thing which is people seem to be super, well, a lot of people are asking for it. Personally, I don't quite understand the requirement of even having that, but maybe that does kind of make sense. Anyway, that's in the queue, and we're working on making that happen. Essentially, web parts can communicate between each other, so you can easily build, for example, a master and a child web parts, like in the old school web part implementation phase. We're also working on modern UI extensions, essentially on the JS link and user custom action replacements for the modern list and libraries, and also for pages in the future. So that work is currently ongoing into engineering. And I can't, I just noticed that somebody is asking a timeline, but I can't actually provide you a timeline on that one because I don't want to promise you anything which we cannot keep. That's the thing. If I would now say that it will be released on next month, and then you have a dependency on that timing, and then if we don't deliver, you would be mad. But it's a good thing that we're already working on it. So that means that it is already in the pipeline. It's not just in our backlog. We are actually actively working on that one. As an example, we do have a dev kitchen for a certain smaller group of our insiders, which is in a few weeks, and in the dev kitchen we will test already some of these capabilities in practice. And I'm gonna mute people because there was some background noise. And then we're working on workbench improvements. So in the workbench, there will be, for example, capabilities of exporting web parts, metadata, because if you need to, as an example, programmatically add a client-side web part to a modern page, you need to have the specific set of JSON plop, and we're adding that capability to the workbench relatively soon. So all of that is kind of evolving as we move along. Oh, and that's actually a good comment from Russell, which I probably should have actually mentioned. So on the Office UI Fabric React, I should have actually add a slide on that one as well, and the Office UI Fabric in general. There is a, well, how would I put it? We're working on a update together with React Office UI Fabric React team and Office UI Fabric team and SPFx to make sure that we address versioning challenges around Office UI Fabric React. That guidance will be out relatively soon. It does require changes in Office UI Fabric React, and those changes are pretty much already done in the Office UI Fabric React side. So if you go to the Office UI React Fabric right now, you can see that there's 2.0. I can't remember what's the final version, which is already out, which relates on the versioning improvements in the future. And the whole point of this exercise is that we can guarantee that if you write a web part right now, it will work properly in 2 years or 3 years, regardless of the React version or the Office UI Fabric version, which is used by the SharePoint Framework or the SharePoint natively. And guarantee is you can actually quote me on that one. If it doesn't work, then it's a bug, and we need to resolve that. So we are absolutely looking into having a solid enterprise stable story around the versioning versioning model, because otherwise, how could anybody trust that the model would be suitable? Good. And now there was a Paul's question. Okay, give me 1 second. Will JS Link remain, or is this a replacement? Okay, good question, which I unfortunately missed. So this is a replacement for the JS Link. Now, probably I actually should have a slide maybe in 2 weeks on the upcoming SPFx explaining this in more detail, why we need to change this model. But let me try to explain that in Finnish. Now, the classic models what we introduced at some point through PNP and many of the community members, where people are using JS Link and user custom action, are based on a model where you modify, or you might modify, the HTML DOM structure of the page. So essentially you are looking in the div, you're injecting HTML in, and voila, it works. And that's all fine, and it works. But the problem is that that's not future-proof. Because if we, Microsoft, change the UI from a DOM structure perspective, your customization will fail. And that means that your customer will be angry, first for you, and then you'll be pointing Microsoft and saying, let's be all angry against Microsoft. So we need to have a more future-proof story for these UI customizations. And that's what we're doing with the modern solution components related on SharePoint Framework. So we will make sure that regardless of the future UI changes, your customization will be there and it will be working, as long as it doesn't have a native or direct dependency on the DOM structure of the page. So essentially we will guarantee certain IDs and links and sections on the page or in the list view, which you can actually modify, and we'll give you the guidance and all of that. And this will then make sure that your customization is more future-proof. And this is actually precisely the reason why we don't want to enable just JS Link and user custom action right now in the modern lists or modern sites in general, because if we would do that, then people would continue implementing customizations which will have a dependency on the DOM structure. And sooner or later, we would actually break them, because the SharePoint is evolving forward as well. So all of the modern UI extensions will be implemented in a way that it's future-proof from a customization perspective as well. Hopefully that did make sense. I'm going to prep some slides maybe for the session in next SPFx session, so I can actually explain that in a step-by-step format in a slide, because I think it's worthwhile to explain why do we do that. Why don't we just enable JS Link and a user custom action? Because there are reasons for it, and we want to avoid your customizations to be broken. We want to make sure that whatever you write once today or in the future, whenever those modern extensibilities are available, they will work for years to come. And that's why it's taking some time, and that's why it's not a direct enablement of those properties in the modern UIs. Hopefully that did make sense. Good. I think that's it from a SPFx perspective. So just quickly coming here. No, I didn't actually miss anything. So we do have a Q&A session and section in the end, but let's first have a look on what Tommy is showing us. This is super cool Chrome SP editor, which Tommy actually have been having this editor in some sense or another for years already, but you've been evolving this quite nicely now. So just take away the presentation.
Hello,
so you can
hello.
start sharing.
Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
All right, all right. I will just share my screen. Okay. So yeah, it's like 2.5 years ago I created the first one and the first version of this. This editor, this extension for Chrome browser. Can you see my sharing?
Not yet.
Okay.
1 second. Still loading. And at least I got it, but I'm pretty close. So that's because somebody else can actually confirm us.
I've got it here.
All right.
Excellent.
So it's an extension for Chrome browser. I created it like 2.5 years ago. And the idea behind it was just to make it faster to create JavaScript solutions for SharePoint using the script editor web part. And there wasn't really tools to make things fast, so it was luck. I saw Andre doing some Chrome extensions, and he works here also close to me, and I knew him. I was talking with him, and he introduced me to the extension. So finally, I don't know how this idea finally came, but I started to play around, and it came out. And the basic idea is, well, first of all, it's open source, so you can go and check out the code. It's all here. I'm not going to go much deeper with the editor. I will now focus on the new feature I added. So, if you are not aware of, so there is this Monaco editor. This is like a visual code editor, but something that you can add to your website. And this is just so simple. You just take the package and you add this code and you can have it in your web page. So it's pretty simple. And the relationship between the Visual Studio Code and Monaco editor is that it's just ported from there and add some shims around it, and it works in the browser. So with this idea, I started to play. I don't know what I was doing, one boring weekend or something, too much free time, so I started to play around with it. And then I realized, hey, I got this my editor, so I tried if it goes inside Chrome extension, and that worked pretty well. So, and then what happened finally, I tested it, and well, here are the other tools. So you can add script links, you can add files to SharePoint, you can modify web properties, you can add webhook bindings to your lists. But this, like last weekend, I added. So what happens here is that I added the PNP TypeScript definitions. So basically, you get all the IntelliSense and whatever the definitions are providing. So you just write PNP, SP, what we want the web, for example, and the lists. So you get IntelliSense. This is a nice way to test out your own scripts. And as it is TypeScript, you get the nice IntelliSense. So if you want to run it, I added this sample code here that it just gets all the list titles of the web. So you hit Ctrl-D. In Mac, you have to use Command-D. But when you hit it, it will show all the list titles here. I've been also thinking, what are the use cases more than just test your own things? Of course, this is a dangerous tool. You can do a lot of harm if you don't know what you are doing. You can delete objects. So I really recommend just to play around in your own development environments. This also works in on-premise versions 13 and 16. So be careful out there. If you are going to do something, don't go to the production environments. I don't know, that's it basically. So maybe I show some code what I did. So it's all in GitHub. My profile is Tavi Kukko. There is another project too. So the Chrome extensions, they are also like, they are web pages running in the Chrome browser. So it was so easy to do it, so I decided to add this possibility here too. So here I just have this Monaco editor element here, and then in the code, let's see. This is old. I've been just playing around, so the code, don't check how the JavaScript is built, but it works. It works very well. So let's see. Okay, so here, when you click the button PNP JS console, it will run this. It will add the definitions. So I've been also playing around that I added all the SharePoint Framework definitions here. So maybe in the future, I don't know, I was playing with the idea that you can create SharePoint Framework web parts with this tool, but let's see if I have time to do something with that. But anyways, if there is any other good definitions to add, this is how to add them. Then here is just one line of code. Then I add some settings, validation and semantic settings. And here is, after it has loaded the definition, it will create the editor. It will add the basic value, which is now this, that you get all the list titles. Then again, some more properties for the editor. I like the dark theme, so I added that there. Then some font size, I like it's big. And then when you are done, when you hit the Control D, I added here the command and the D key. So what it will do, it will get the value from the editor, compile it. This is something you have to do to make it work really. And then this is the execution script, and your code will basically go here, and then it will execute it. If you want to see what really happens, what is the code it's going to execute in the side, there is this small snippet here. So it will take, it's using the PNP 2.0.2 version, so the latest version, also with the definitions. So the extension itself has the PNP library, so it will use that. It will load the system.js if it's not loaded in the page. Normally in the modern pages, at least, yeah, I think in the modern page itself it has the system.js. So if it doesn't find it, it will use also the system.js, which is provided by the extension. It will load it. It will do the module binding, and I just added some code here that people can see what is really happening. So here you will then see what was the outcome of the transpilation of the TypeScript to JavaScript. Yeah.
Cool. Tommy, just 2 questions, kind of clarifying this. So are you, I know that, well, Tommy is actually one of the guys behind of the Valo intranet. So are you using this as part of your development cycle?
Well, this, the idea was this, because all the new things were new for me, like Stilis, all the TypeScript and SharePoint Framework stuff. So I wanted some interesting way to get down with the TypeScript. So I just created this to learn more and how to test this PNP library.
Yeah.
But these other things, the script links, these, we started the Valo development 2 years ago, so this was really the fastest way. So if we needed to do a new feature, for example, a new web part, I could write. Okay, I will show now how fast it is for some people who want to do something quickly. So I just do like my app.js. So this will now add this script to a style library. But then you also want to use it in the page, so you can inject it there using the custom action. So I will give like sequence 1000 and just click here, add to site collection. So now if I refresh the page, I check the sources and I should have it here, my app. So it will say created from the Chrome editor. So if I now add here like, maybe better to add like console. Hello, and then I need to enable the save and update. So now if I save this from here, so it's saved. If I refresh the page, you should see something here, hello. So that's it, it's so fast. And also we are using some web property handling, so here you can create your own web properties also fast. So I can like my key, my value, and it will add the key here. I can find it here, my key. I can update it here, my key follower, yeah, update.
So I would say that let's make sure that none of the normal, let's say, end users are not aware of this. So we have to have some sort of a, because they can accidentally, no doubt, kill their site.
Yeah,
but it's a super useful tool because this is essentially, this is a modern SharePoint designer, kind of. Why would you use a SharePoint designer? Because that's not fast enough comparing to this one. Yeah. So absolutely correct tool for development.
A couple of things, one more. The webhooks, you know, you have to, it's a little bit difficult or not fast enough to create the webhook bindings. So with this, when you have already the context with your user ID, so you can easily do the bindings for the webhook endpoints, which is also fast. Otherwise, you have to do the AD application or whatever, how to do it. And this same to test your own things, there is instructions in the PnP site, is good. But if you just want to quickly test something, I think this is good. That's all.
You are way too...
You're way too modest.
Yes, exactly.
This is really cool, and I think, I mean, I love, personally, the PnP library integration, I think is really cool, but just in general for SharePoint Framework, I think this is a fantastic tool for prototyping code and learning code without having to deploy or use the workbench or anything. If you just want to go, can I do X, and try it out real quick. Really fantastic tool.
Yeah,
really
I think
impressive.
that's the use case, the basic use case for this.
And you actually got an offer to move into St. Louis as well on the IM Windows.
Okay, I need to start reading more here. Chat. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I don't know about fantastic. The healthcare thingies and differences between Finland and US. That could be a factor, but tell me, up to you. So never mind. Right. Excellent, excellent stuff.
And if there is any bugs or anything, because it's open source, or ideas what there could be more, just do an issue in the GitHub, and that's it.
So this is your essentially hobby. You are actively doing some level of a development.
Yeah. Well, everybody knows how it is to work with SharePoint. No hard feelings. But sometimes you need to play around with it too, and this is what it makes it fun, I have to say.
Yeah, that's fair. And we'll add that link to the Chrome extension in the video notes whenever this will go live on the YouTube as well. So cool.
Yeah, very cool. Really cool stuff. I encourage everybody to check that out. It's really neat. I think it's going to be a great asset to speeding up the client-side development tasks. So moving on, we've got plenty of time left for an open discussion around any of the topics we talked about today, SharePoint Framework in general, client-side development in general. What's on your mind, folks? We got Vesa back on the call this week, so if you have SharePoint Framework questions, we got the right guy on the call.
And you feel free to unmute yourself if there's any questions. Absolutely. These are intentionally, we want to keep these calls have a time for questions and answers if there's anything.
Hey guys, this is David Warner. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So without asking you to divulge too much around user custom actions and JS Link, just going over what you had reviewed already in terms of the DOM manipulation and stuff like that. I don't know, Vesa, if you got to watch the demo that I'd done last SIG session, PNP session a couple weeks ago, but we were overriding the experience of, the forms and all that to create using just a text field, right? And so we were creating more of an interactive window for users to select things like icons or colors or something like that. Is the new functionality for the replacements for those going to allow those kinds of creative innovations around that, would you say?
That's absolutely the purpose. So we're not planning to actually tie people's hands with the implementation. We just want to make sure that it's more future-proof. So whenever the UIs are changing, your customization would be working. In the same way, it's pretty obvious when we introduced the list and new modern list and libraries, you actually lost your customization.
Right.
We don't want to do that again. That was obviously a massive mistake and a messaging issue, and no doubt I do apologize on behalf of Microsoft on doing that. But we want to make sure that in the future, whenever we do, not that dramatical changes, but hopefully smaller changes, they don't impact your customization as much.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that answers the question. A lot of innovation possibilities with those kinds of functionalities. So glad to hear they're not just going away.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Cool.
So one of the questions Kenny had, Patrick, can you talk a little bit about the post you made on business objects? So I will do that. Hopefully folks are seeing my screen, which should be the wiki page.
Yep.
For folks that might not be come here often, please do check out the wiki. We're doing our best to get this updated. It's an ongoing endeavor, but we're doing our best to get some good documentation out there for folks. Do check out, there's a developer guide link here in the menu now. And so we've tried to put a series of articles in here on getting started, working with the library, some of the batching, caching, how to debug, etc., and then guides around the specific areas. You can see going roughly in alphabetical order where I'm at in terms of getting through those. We, of course, welcome help on any of these. So if you want to put together a guide on one of these many topics, please do check that out. But what we put up yesterday was extending with custom business objects. So to talk about that sort of quickly, not take too much time, there is a sample out there. This is the knockout sample Vesa was talking about before, mentioned before. But really, so the library is, the goal was never to be very heavyweight, it was to be very lightweight. But recognizing folks are going to need an opportunity to extend what we're giving or what we're providing. So this article sort of walks you through, and of course, again, on everything, welcome feedback if there's parts of this that can be more clear on defining your custom business objects. So I call this my item. You could call it an order or whatever, but every project, you generally have these sort of entities. And then in client-side development, you often in frameworks have the concept of binding those entities to something, to a template, to a framework somehow, right? Whether it's React, Knockout, they all have that concept of binding data to the form or the display. And so taking and sort of extending the library into business objects, you can create these concrete classes that have well-identified properties, so title, product number, etc. And then the basic example, you can use the getAs method, and that will and you can type things. But this typing is treating it as an interface. So you're not actually getting any methods or anything sort of, any real benefit there. You're just sort of using my item as an interface in this case. So the next step is to extend my item from the item class. So now my item is going to have all of the methods from item that are part of the library. So that's sort of just standard object inheritance. But then what we can do is use one of our special parsers, and there's a separate article in the wiki describing in detail the parsers and how they work. But we can take and say, give me back an entity array of this type, and then you give it the constructor of your object, essentially, which is just my item passed in as a type. And you might have seen a similar pattern in, say, C# where you would do something like this, but you would do get as and your type brackets my item or something like that. Well, in C# we could use reflection, and we could get that T and get type of T and create new instances. You can't really do that in JavaScript. The T you see a lot of the times in generics has no analog once it's actually become JavaScript code, so we need the factory method of our object, which is why we say give me an OData entity array of my item, and then what you're going to get back is going to be a typed array where each object in that array is of type my item. But the other thing this is going to do is going to take and create for each object that comes back from this query. So this list, I think, has 5 or 6 items in it. For each of those, it's going to create a new instance of my item and then merge that with the data that's come back. So instead of getting just sort of a plain object result of type any, so you'd have items 0 would be of a type any. In this case, you've got your typed properties, you'll get the correct IntelliSense there, but you also are now dealing with an item entity and the properties of the item entity, so you can chain off of this. So I could say item 0 dot update and pass it a plain object and things like that. So then once you start down that path, you can say, well, now I can add methods to my object. So here's my class, my item, extending item again, and we have our properties, but I've added a save method which sort of covers up or hides the use of update. So you could say myitem.update, or you could say myitem.save, and what we've done is just sort of wrap this up as an example to say these are the properties we're going to update. I'm going to set them from this. So for each object, I'm obviously using that object's or that instance's values, running that update, and then getting my result back. And there's a new method was added in 202 specifically because I was working on this article, which is the as operator, and that essentially is going to cast, because that result item that comes back from the update is not cast as my item, it's just an item. So I'm saying make that item as my item, and that's going to do the same thing, which is create a new instance of my item and then merge the data from item into that, and so we'll get that back. So you'll see that as operator throughout this example. And that's, again, it's a way to do typing in JavaScript and getting the factory methods and things like that, because we don't have the ability to do like a, as with just the sort of brackets and pass the type in that way as a generic, similar to what you might do in C#. So then, to kind of close this out a little bit, I've got a much fuller example here, and you can actually paste this in and run this as a debug method. If you read the debugging article, this will paste in, but you could use this in a program as an example as well. But what I've done is I've extended web, I've extended list, and then I've got my item down here as well. And I've just done some different techniques. This isn't to say these are the best or the right ways to do it. For example, my web, I added a method for get my list that returns my list, and it uses our ensure method. So you can see object interdependence here. I'm getting the list title off of my list, so you might not want to do that. You could pass in the list name as a string. There's lots of options here, but this is just sort of to highlight how you can extend these objects from what we're providing in the core library, get all their functionality, and then add your own functionality to it. So every time, if you're getting the same list for your project 50 times, you don't have to say sp web lists get by title. You can create a method on your web object that gets that list for you. And then we're again using as to cast those things. But the last thing I'll show, and then I'll look back at the screen to see if there's other questions, we can move on. But you can use the as in your sort of fluent chain, right? So you can do sp or pmp sp web dot as my web, and then that web object is now of type my web, and you'll have all the standard web methods available as well as your custom ones. So it allows you right inside your chains to cast things to your custom business types as well at any level. So if you got, if you were doing the same thing and said web .lists, get by title, .items, etc. You could do .as my item, things like that. So just wanted to show that real quick. And then I sort of expanded item and show you some techniques for in get here, for example, we're always adding the selects if stuff hasn't been specified to help with optimization. So an opportunity there. There's our save method. And then this example is just, or this function example is just an example. It's just running all the code we've written above. So it's saying get my list, use our custom get top 5 items method, which we know is going to give us back an array of my items, log some info about that, and then showing that you can do an item 0.update, or you can do, if you get your item, you can just set the properties and do save, and then you can also, I've got list on my list, I've got an add my item that takes all the properties of my item and then handles adding it there. So check that out. I think it's a pretty good example of how to do that. And again, of course, feedback absolutely welcome. On improving that sort of sample. So hopefully that helps answer your question, Kenny. And again, welcome feedback on that, as with everything else.
Thank you, Patrick. Awesome implementation. Now, there's quite a lot of IAM discussions and questions coming along, so let's actually deep dive on them. I just noticed that Leo just pointed his question right after Kenny's comment. So any idea when it's possible to deploy SPFx web parts tenant-wide instead of site-by-site? So right now, like it's actually mentioned in the IAM window, you need to install a SharePoint Framework solution to your site to make it visible in the site. If the SharePoint Framework solution, client-side web part solution, does not contain any site-specific assets like feature framework for lists and content types and fields, then in the future you're able to get it available across the tenant. Now, when, I cannot actually say that, or we don't know exactly the timing, but it's already essentially implemented. We have the readiness to do that. We just need to make sure that it's fully polished, tested, and verified, and then we'll push it out. Essentially, it's planned to be working in a way that if the solution package does not have any site-dependent assets like mentioned, then you're able to get the client-side web part visible across the tenant with a one deployment. Good. Just scanning through the questions. Will the code for existing modern web parts be publicly available? Couldn't find it last time I searched. Not right now. We are looking into getting that stuff public at some point as well. Most likely we'll start with a subset of web parts and then we extend that into future. But it's not yet at least available. Would it be nice to have a weekly recent updates? Absolutely agree on that, and absolutely agree that it would be great to have same recent updates for SPFx docs or MSDN in general. And yes, I do absolutely agree on the fact that living docs are really difficult to stay up to date. Right now, we unfortunately our CMS system, which we're using, which is the OrCAD actually is behind of the dev.office.com. It does not, our current implementation does not give us this capabilities. So, but we're looking into the future, and that's good feedback, absolutely valid feedback. How do I check if SPFx is enabled in my developer site? It is enabled across all of the tenants, so you don't actually need to check that. Will we be able to add web parts to page layouts at any point, or will it be always a manual step for a user to add it to page? Answer is no. We actually, when was it? Last week's SharePoint, we had a special interest group last week related on PMP site score and PMP PowerShell, and quite often we actually touch modern sites on those calls as well. And in there was a live demo done by Bert Janssen, how to actually programmatically create modern pages and add additional web parts or custom web parts on those pages. We did record a webcast on that one yesterday. It will go live on Monday with the references to code examples and all of that, so you're able to actually have a closer look on how to create modern pages and add web parts on them as well. You are able to also add modern web parts to classic pages sooner or later. We just need to document the stuff properly as well. Scanning through questions. In the future, by the way, the .webpart file, already right now, SharePoint Framework does not contain a .webpart file. So it used to do that in the previous drops, but in the release candidate and in GA, there's no webpart file. Kind of touching that one. Quite a lot of questions. Scanning through. Any plans to support partial imports for PnP.js, like import search? That's for Patrick. Patrick, did I cut you off guard?
Yep.
Don't multitask.
I actually answered that down below. So yes, we do have many of our internal objects. You can import like web, for example, list. If you look at that example, I'm importing web, list, and item, as well as the OData entity parsers. Pardon me. So many of those things are importable on their own. Because we rolled back to ES5, you cannot optimize and just pull those bits out with, say, like rollup or something like that at this point. But you can import just the things you need. So if you want just web or just search, you can do that. So I believe search is exported. I'd have to actually check. But like web and a lot of those things are for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Just scanning through. I don't know if you answered that. There's a question from Rahul around, is it possible to deploy SPFx web parts directly to the developer side rather than adding that to the app catalog? Answer is no. You need to add it to the app catalog if you want to use the web part on actual pages. Now, you can always use the live SharePoint Online workbench to do live testing in a SharePoint, because that is in the context of the site. So you can actually do development in the context of SharePoint, access the list and do manipulations. But you would be hosting on your workbench, which is then a development time experience. We are actually looking into having a site collection scoped catalog as well, but that does require a tenant level control to be set it or support that and all of that, because then that opens up a additional set of questions and security concerns and all that. So that's absolutely in the backlog. Again, don't have an exact timeline when it would be available. Kenny is commenting, I thought we had a public modern web parts in the 40 web parts. That's actually Olivier's personal hobby. He's doing that on evenings and weekends, so he's sharing sample web parts. Is it fabulous 40 web parts or whatever? Olivier is not actually in the engineering. He's a salesperson from France. He just has a awesome hobby. Let's see. Oh, that's it. We went through all of the questions. We have 3 minutes. Do we have Mark still on the call? Because I wanted to have a quick chat with related on something which is on Mark's close to Mark's heart. He is actually away. Status offline. It's too bad. So one of the things we've been chatting on the social media, and there's ongoing discussions with MEPs around the fact that hey, SharePoint Framework does require that you need to get your SPFx solution deployed always in the app catalog to make them possible, and that then essentially makes the classic story of script editor web part based customizations where let's say a slightly skilled end user would like to do some small modifications essentially impossible, because SPFx does require that it's a tenant administrative approval to get stuff deployed. So On that one, again, in our backlog, we are aware of the request. We're looking into having, again, more flexibility on this one. So also enable simplistic scenarios where people need to have some level of a customizations in the lists or list fields or in the pages. But again, it's in a backlog. I can't promise that we will be delivering that, but we are absolutely aware of the request. So having that basic support for more flexibility. There's Mark Anderson. Yes, there we go. I thought the status is showing that you're away. Interesting. But yeah, so we are absolutely, that is in the pipeline to make sure that to figure out how do we want to do that. The challenge of the script having too much flexibility for the end users and let's say information workers, whatever we call them nowadays, is that they can actually do, let's say, horrible stuff within the sites as well. And it is absolutely valid request. That's why SharePoint is successful, because in some customers, people have that flexibility, then some enterprise customers want to have control. I think both sides are absolutely correct. This is not a debate where somebody is right or wrong. We just need to find out the right balance and compromise for enabling that flexibility if that's allowed in the tenant level for the end users. And then if the tenant administrators say, no, we don't want anybody to accidentally do any accidents on their sites, then they can disable the capability. In a backlog, absolutely. Yes, control is good, but only sensible control. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I think we've got to the end of the hour here. I think great discussion. Appreciate everybody's questions and thoughts on all the various topics. Thank you, Vesa, as always, for fantastic updates and insight into the engineering process, which we're not always all privy to. Remind folks, next meeting is going to be March 30th. That's in 2 weeks. And hope to see everybody there. So thank you all. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.